Living aboard the USS Michael Monsoor is unlike anything else on this planet. It's a 610-foot Zumwalt-class stealth destroyer where 147 sailors and Marines work and live for 6 months straight in the middle of the ocean with absolutely no access to fresh supplies. That's roughly 32 square feet per person for sleeping, eating, working, and everything else, while this $4.4 billion warship patrols some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. And it's quite impressive how the crew manages to store and consume over 175,000 pounds of food in a vessel designed primarily for stealth and advanced weapon systems. How they get pretty creative with every cubic inch of available storage to keep 147 people fed 3 meals a day for 180 days straight, while maintaining the most advanced combat readiness in the Navy. The USS Michael Monsoor DDG-1001 costs approximately $4.4 billion to build and maintain, making it one of the most expensive and technologically advanced surface warships ever constructed. It's equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology, advanced radar systems, guided missiles, and electromagnetic railgun capabilities. But all that sophisticated weaponry means nothing if the crew can't eat. The thing is that on a deployment lasting 6 months, there's no stopping at ports for groceries, no delivery trucks, no emergency resupply runs unless it's a genuine crisis. Everything these sailors and Marines will consume, breakfast, lunch, dinner, midnight snacks, coffee, and water, must be loaded onto the ship before they leave port. And since refrigeration space is severely limited and electricity is precious for operating combat systems, the food storage operation becomes a complex puzzle of creativity, planning, and sometimes uncomfortable compromise. The 6-month food storage strategy. Before we talk about what the crew eats, you need to understand the sheer impossibility of storing 6 months of food on a warship. The USS Michael Monsoor has approximately 8,500 cubic feet of total storage space dedicated to food provisions. That sounds like a lot until you realize it needs to hold 175,000 pounds of supplies. To put it into perspective, that's the equivalent of trying to fit an entire grocery store's worth of food into a space smaller than a 3-car garage, and then making it last for 180 days without a single resupply run. The Navy uses what's called a multi-tiered storage hierarchy, a fancy term for storing food in literally every possible space on the ship. Tier 1 is the primary cold storage. Those 2 refrigeration rooms we mentioned, operating at 28 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit and holding approximately 45,000 pounds of frozen meats, dairy, and perishables. These reefers are loaded floor to ceiling with carefully organized pallets, and there's a precise map showing exactly where every case of chicken, every box of butter, and every bag of frozen vegetables is located. Tier 2 is the dry goods storage, 3 dedicated compartments totaling about 3,200 cubic feet. This is where the canned goods, rice, pasta, flour, and non-perishables live. But here's where it gets interesting. These rooms are organized by consumption timeline. Items that will be used in months 1 to 2 are stored toward the front and bottom for easy access. Supplies for months 5 to 6 are buried in the back and stacked to the ceiling. The culinary specialists maintain a rotating inventory system called FIFO, first in, first out, ensuring nothing expires before it's consumed. Tier 3 is where the Navy gets pretty creative. This is called distributed storage, which means food is literally stored anywhere there's empty space. We're talking about cases of canned vegetables tucked under stairwells, boxes of crackers secured in void spaces between bulkheads, and bags of coffee stashed in corners of engineering compartments. There are 47 documented secondary storage locations throughout the USS Michael Monsoor, and every single one is tracked in a digital inventory system. Sailors walking through passageways routinely step over cases of tomato sauce or squeeze past boxes of cereal that are strapped to the walls with cargo netting. But the most surprising storage solution is what the Navy calls berthing auxiliary storage. Translation: food is stored under the bunks where sailors sleep. Those bottom racks have approximately 18 inches of clearance underneath, and that space is packed with non-perishable items. A sailor sleeping on a bottom rack is literally lying 3 feet above cases of peanut butter, boxes of instant oatmeal, and bags of dried beans. In fact, approximately 12,000 pounds of food, nearly 7% of the total supply, is stored in berthing areas. The crew jokes that their racks are the most expensive storage units in the world when you factor in the $4.4 billion price tag of the ship. Then there's the emergency backup system. Hidden in secured compartments throughout the ship are what's called 30-day contingency rations, specialized long shelf life meals that require no refrigeration and minimal preparation. These aren't your standard MRES. They're specially designed retort pouches, like camping meals, with a 10-year shelf life, covering breakfast, lunch, and dinner with about 3,500 calories per day per person. The USS Michael Monsoor carries 4,410 of these complete daily ration packs, which equals exactly 30 days for the entire crew. These are sealed in waterproof containers and only open during genuine emergencies, galley fire, combat damage to food storage areas, or catastrophic refrigeration failure. The kitchen and the food. Here's where everything gets interesting. The food aboard the USS Michael Monsoor is famously excellent, considered the best in the entire military. This isn't an exaggeration. Navy cooks, officially called culinary specialists, go through extensive training at the Navy's Joint Culinary Center of Excellence in Virginia. They compete in military cooking competitions, earn professional certifications, and take genuine pride in feeding the crew. The reason is simple. Good food is critical for morale when you're trapped on a stealth destroyer in the middle of the ocean for 6 months. But since the USS Michael Monsoor was designed for stealth and automation rather than creature comfort, the storage solutions get pretty creative. Let me give you the actual numbers. For a 180-day deployment with 147 people eating 3 meals per day plus midnight rations for night watch crews, the ship must store approximately 175,000 pounds of food. That's 87.5 tons. To put it into perspective, that's the weight of about 29 automobiles, and it all needs to fit into a vessel where every cubic foot is already allocated to advanced weapon systems, ammunition, fuel, spare parts, electronic warfare equipment, and sleeping space. The smaller crew size compared to traditional destroyers means more automation, but also means every storage space counts even more. The breakdown is fascinating. The ship loads approximately 7,000 pounds of chicken, 6,200 pounds of beef, 4,600 pounds of pork, 3,100 pounds of turkey, 5,800 pounds of fish and seafood, 9,700 pounds of fresh vegetables for the first 2 to 3 weeks, 13,500 pounds of frozen vegetables, 10,800 pounds of canned vegetables, 8,500 pounds of fresh fruit first 3 weeks, 11,600 pounds of canned and dried fruit, 3,100 dozen eggs, 970 gallons of milk, fresh for first week, 5,800 pounds of flour and baking ingredients, 4,600 pounds of rice and pasta, 3,100 pounds of coffee, absolutely critical, 17,400 pounds of additional dry goods, condiments, and supplies. The storage challenge is immense. The USS Michael Monsoor has 2 main refrigeration spaces called reefers, cold storage rooms maintained at 28 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. These spaces total about 1,200 cubic feet, roughly the size of a small bedroom. That's where all the meat, dairy, and frozen goods must fit. The temperature is kept just above freezing to prevent ice buildup while preserving the food. There are also dry storage rooms for canned goods and non-perishables, but even these spaces are limited. The Zumwalt-class was designed with a drastically reduced crew through automation, which means less food overall, but also significantly less storage space allocated for provisions. So the Navy gets creative. Cases of canned goods are stored under dining tables in the mess deck. Boxes of cereal and crackers line the passageways between berthing areas. Bags of potatoes and onions occupy corners in engineering spaces where the ambient warmth actually helps prevent spoilage through faster use. Crates of apples, which last longer than most fresh fruits, get stacked in small voids near the ship's magazine where ammunition is stored. In fact, sailors joke that you're more likely to trip over a box of cornflakes than a wrench while walking through the ship. The fresh food timeline is predictable and somewhat depressing. For the first week, there's fresh milk, lettuce, tomatoes, and even fresh-baked bread made daily by the culinary specialists. It's pretty much like eating at a decent restaurant. By week 2, the milk is gone, replaced by powdered milk that tastes exactly like you'd expect. Fresh vegetables start disappearing around day 18 to 21. Apples last until about day 30. After that, it's frozen, canned, and dehydrated everything for the remaining 5 months. The ship's galley operates on a 4-meal schedule because the crew works in rotating watches around the clock. Breakfast is served from 0600 to 0730, lunch from 1100 to 1230, dinner from 1700 to 1830, and then there's midrats, midnight rations, from 2300 to 0030 for sailors coming off or going on night watch. That's 4 complete meal services every single day for 180 days. To put it into perspective, the culinary specialists prepare approximately 105,840 individual meals during a standard deployment. The galley itself is surprisingly small, about 25 feet by 35 feet, containing industrial ovens, grills, deep fryers, steam kettles, and a dishwashing station. 4 to 6 culinary specialists work each shift, coordinating like a professional kitchen brigade. They're baking 15 to 20 loaves of bread daily, preparing 45 to 50 pounds of meat per meal, and cooking enough rice or potatoes to feed a small restaurant. Moreover, they're doing this while the ship is pitching and rolling in heavy seas, with hot grease sloshing in deep fryers and boiling water threatening to spill from massive pots. The Zumwalt-class hull design is actually more stable than traditional destroyers, but in rough weather, cooking still becomes a dangerous ballet of timing and balance. Sleeping quarters and storage reality. Before we talk about the food itself, you need to understand where it's actually stored. The sleeping quarters on a destroyer are called berthing areas, and they're designed with maximum efficiency, which is a polite way of saying they're incredibly cramped. Each sailor gets a rack that's essentially a fabric-covered metal frame measuring 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and about 18 inches of vertical clearance. These racks are stacked 3 high, and they're called coffin racks for obvious reasons. There's barely enough room to roll over, let alone sit up. For 147 personnel, there are approximately 142 racks available. The math here reveals something called hot bunking, the practice where 3 sailors share 2 racks based on rotating watch schedules. When one person is on duty, another is sleeping in what was just their bed. Fresh sheets aren't always part of the equation. In fact, sailors on different watch rotations rarely see each other, communicating through notes left on pillows. Personal storage consists of a small locker measuring roughly 2 feet high, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep. That's it. That's where 6 months of civilian clothes, toiletries, photos from home, and personal items must fit. Moreover, under each bottom rack is additional storage space, and here's where things get interesting. The Navy gets pretty creative with this under-bunk storage. While officially designated for personal gear, these spaces frequently hold cases of food. Boxes of crackers, canned goods, and non-perishable snacks often end up stuffed under sleeping sailors because there's simply nowhere else to put them. Officers fare slightly better with 2-person staterooms instead of massive berthing areas, but they're still working with spaces the size of a walk-in closet. Senior officers and the commanding officer get single rooms, but even the captain's quarters are smaller than a typical hotel room. And yes, even in officer country, you'll find food storage solutions that would never appear in the official Navy handbook. Cases of coffee tucked behind furniture, boxes of cereal stacked in corners, and emergency snack rations hidden in desk drawers. Toilets, showers, and hygiene facilities. The hygiene facilities reveal another dimension of life aboard the USS Michael Monsoor that directly impacts how food is managed. For 147 people, there are approximately 12 shower stalls available to enlisted personnel. That's a ratio of 1 shower for every 12 people, actually better than older destroyers, but still limited. The official Navy regulation allows for 3 to 5 minute showers, strictly timed and enforced, especially during water conservation periods. The water used for showers is desalinated seawater, produced by reverse osmosis systems that consume significant electrical power, and fresh water is actually a limited resource even when you're floating in an ocean. When the ship needs to conserve power for combat systems, or when the desalination equipment requires maintenance, showers get restricted to even shorter durations, sometimes just 2 minutes, which the crew calls a Navy shower. 30 seconds to get wet, water off while soaping, 90 seconds to rinse. There's a special category called Hollywood showers, longer, more leisurely showers that are granted as rewards for exceptional performance or during periods when water is plentiful. These are coveted privileges worth their weight in gold. Plus, the connection to food is direct. The galley uses approximately 60% of the ship's fresh water supply for cooking, cleaning dishes, and food preparation. Every gallon used for showers is a gallon not available for cooking. Officers have separate heads, Navy term for bathrooms, with better ratios, approximately 1 shower for every 10 to 12 officers. But even these facilities are tiny, with shower stalls barely 2.5 feet square. The toilets themselves are military-grade metal fixtures that can handle the ship's motion in rough seas, and they're positioned so close together that privacy is more theoretical than actual. Transition to extended content. But that's just the beginning of the food story aboard the USS Michael Monsoor. Understanding where food is stored and how meals are prepared is only part of what makes this stealth destroyer's food operations remarkable. What we haven't discussed yet is how this food operation impacts combat readiness on the most advanced destroyer in the world. What happens during actual military operations with such a small crew, and the sophisticated logistics network that makes it all possible. The reality is that food management aboard a Zumwalt-class destroyer is a military operation in itself, involving supply chain planning, security protocols, and contingency procedures that would rival any major restaurant chain. Let's take a deeper look at what really happens when the ship is underway and how this minimal crew maintains this system under extreme conditions. Extended Section 1: Combat Operations and Food Rationing. Here's something most people don't realize. The food operation aboard the USS Michael Monsoor must continue seamlessly during actual combat situations. When the ship goes to general quarters, the highest alert status during combat or potential attack, every sailor reports to their battle station. This includes most of the culinary specialists who have secondary duties operating damage control equipment, manning communication systems, or assisting in the ship's medical bay. So who cooks during combat? The answer is essentially nobody. During general quarters, which can last 4, 8, 12, or even 24 hours, the crew subsists on what's called battle rations. These aren't MRES like the Army uses. Instead, the galley pre-prepares food specifically designed to be eaten cold or at room temperature during extended alert periods. We're talking sandwiches wrapped in plastic, pre-made burritos, energy bars, fruit cups, and thermoses of coffee distributed throughout the ship before the alarm sounds. The USS Michael Monsoor's smaller crew size makes this even more critical. With only 147 personnel versus the 300 to 400 on traditional destroyers, every single person has multiple essential duties. Losing even one culinary specialist to combat operations means the remaining food service personnel are stretched impossibly thin. In fact, during extended operations in high-threat areas like the South China Sea or the Persian Gulf, the ship often operates at a modified general quarters status called Modified Zebra for days or even weeks at a time. During Modified Zebra, the galley operates on a reduced schedule. Instead of 4 full meal services, they might consolidate to 2 main meals with grab-and-go options available around the clock. This is where those cases of food stored under bunks and in passageways become critical. Sailors are encouraged to maintain personal stashes of non-perishable snacks, crackers, peanut butter, protein bars, instant noodles, because regular meal times become unreliable during combat operations. But here's where it gets really interesting. The USS Michael Monsoor carries approximately 30 days of emergency rations in addition to the regular food stores. These are vacuum-sealed meals designed to last for years without refrigeration. They're stored in a secured compartment near the ship's Combat Information Center. In the event of a catastrophic scenario, let's say the galley is damaged by enemy fire, the refrigeration systems fail, or the ship needs to operate in complete electromagnetic silence, meaning no cooking equipment can be used, these emergency rations keep the crew alive. The Navy calculated that in an absolute worst-case scenario, rationing the emergency food alongside any remaining regular stores, the crew of the USS Michael Monsoor could survive for approximately 45 to 50 additional days beyond their normal food supply. That means this destroyer could theoretically operate for nearly 8 months without resupply if necessary. To put it into perspective, that's longer than most submarines stay submerged, and it's a capability that reflects the strategic importance of the Zumwalt-class in potential prolonged conflicts where supply lines might be disrupted. Extended Section 2, the Culinary Specialist Qualification and Training. Let's talk about the people who make all of this happen. Becoming a culinary specialist in the U.S. Navy isn't just about knowing how to cook. It's an intensive professional program that rivals civilian culinary schools, combined with military training that prepares these sailors. Culinary specialists attend a 76-day training course at the Joint Culinary Center of Excellence, JCCE, at Fort Gregg Adams in Virginia. This isn't your average cooking school. Students learn to prepare meals for hundreds of people simultaneously, master food safety protocols that prevent disease outbreaks in closed environments, and develop skills in nutrition management for personnel under extreme physical stress. They learn to bake bread from scratch, butcher entire sides of beef and pork, prepare food from dozens of different cultural traditions, and create meals that maintain morale under the worst possible circumstances. But that's just the beginning. They also receive training in chemical, biological, and radiological food contamination procedures. In the event of a NBC attack, nuclear, biological, chemical, culinary specialists must know how to determine if food stores have been contaminated, how to decontaminate food preparation areas, and how to safely prepare meals using only sealed emergency rations. On the USS Michael Monsoor, with its advanced mission profile potentially operating in areas where such threats are real, this training isn't theoretical. Advanced culinary specialists can earn additional qualifications through the Navy's prestigious culinary competition system. Every year, Navy cooks compete in regional and national competitions that are judged by professional chefs from civilian organizations like the American Culinary Federation. Winners earn medals, special recognition, and sometimes the opportunity to cook at high-level military functions, including state dinners at the White House. In fact, several White House executive chefs have been former Navy culinary specialists. On the USS Michael Monsoor specifically, the lead culinary specialist typically holds the rank of Petty Officer First Class or Chief Petty Officer and has at least 8 to 10 years of experience. This person is responsible not just for preparing food, but for managing the entire food service operation, inventory control, menu planning, budget management. The food budget is approximately $15 to $18 per person per day, totaling about $2,200 daily, equipment maintenance, and training junior culinary specialists. The menu planning process alone is incredibly complex. Menus must be approved by the ship's medical officer to ensure nutritional adequacy. Sailors require approximately 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day due to the physical demands and stress of shipboard operations. Menus must also account for religious dietary restrictions, halal, kosher, medical dietary needs, allergies, diabetes, and cultural preferences within the diverse crew. Plus, there's an unwritten rule that certain comfort foods must appear regularly. Pizza every Friday, surf and turf once a month, Taco Tuesday, and elaborate holiday meals for Thanksgiving and Christmas, even if the ship is in the middle of a combat zone. Here's a surprising fact. The USS Michael Monsoor's galley maintains detailed records of every single meal served, including photographs. These records are submitted for annual food service evaluations, where the ship competes against other Navy vessels for the Captain Edward F. Ney Memorial Award for Best Food Service, essentially the Oscars of military food. Ships take this competition seriously because winning brings prestige, special recognition for the Culinary team, and bragging rights across the fleet. The USS Michael Monsoor won the award in its first full year of operation, a remarkable achievement for such a new vessel. Extended Section 3, Underway Replenishment and the Supply Chain. Now let's discuss something that sounds simple but is actually one of the most dangerous and impressive operations in naval warfare, getting food onto a destroyer that's already at sea. It's called Underway Replenishment, or UNREP, and watching it happen is like witnessing a carefully choreographed dance between massive ships traveling at 12 to 15 knots while connected by cables carrying tons of supplies. The USS Michael Monsoor typically conducts UNREP operations every 30 to 45 days during deployment. A supply ship, usually a Henry J. Kaiser-class oiler like the USNS John Lenthal, pulls alongside the destroyer, maintaining a parallel course with just 120 to 180 feet of separation between the two vessels. Think about that. Two ships, each weighing thousands of tons, traveling at 15 miles per hour, separated by less distance than a basketball court is long in the middle of the ocean with waves and wind constantly trying to push them together. A special crew sets up a system of cables and pulleys between the ships. Then pallets loaded with food, each weighing 500 to 1,000 pounds, are attached to the cables and hauled across the gap on electrically powered winches. On the USS Michael Monsoor's deck, sailors in helmets and colored vests, called UNREP teams, guide these pallets down to the deck, disconnect them from the cable, and immediately send the cable back for the next load. The entire operation might transfer 40,000 to 60,000 pounds of food and supplies in just 2 to 3 hours. But here's what makes it dangerous. Everything is happening on a moving platform that's pitching and rolling with the sea. The cables are under tremendous tension. If one breaks, it can whip across the deck like a massive steel blade, potentially killing anyone in its path. Pallets swinging on cables can slam into structures or people. Plus, the ships are maintaining radio silence or minimal communication to avoid detection, so coordination relies on hand signals and precisely trained crews who've practiced this dozens of times. For the USS Michael Monsoor specifically, UNREP is even more critical because the ship's stealth profile means it often operates far from other naval assets, sometimes weeks away from the main carrier strike group. The food supply chain for this destroyer begins months before deployment at massive Defense Logistics Agency warehouses in places like Virginia, California, and Hawaii. Contracts with food suppliers are worth millions of dollars and specify exact quantities, delivery schedules, and quality standards. Here's something fascinating. The Navy maintains a database called the Armed Forces Recipe Service, with over 1,700 standardized recipes designed for military food service. When the culinary specialists on the USS Michael Monsoor order food for a deployment, they're actually submitting recipe codes that automatically generate shopping lists. Recipe B12, Navy-style meatloaf, automatically orders the correct amounts of ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings. This standardization means that a sailor eating meatloaf on the USS Michael Monsoor gets essentially the same meal as a sailor eating on any other Navy vessel worldwide. The supply chain includes specialized vendors who understand military requirements. For example, eggs aren't delivered in normal cartons. They arrive in special long-life packaging that extends freshness from 4 to 5 weeks to nearly 8 to 10 weeks through special washing and coating processes. Bread isn't baked and frozen like civilian bread, it's par-baked, partially baked, then frozen, allowing the culinary specialist to finish baking it on board for that fresh bread smell that's crucial for morale. Even coffee is special. Navy coffee is a custom blend designed to remain flavorful even when brewed in massive quantities and kept hot for hours. Extended Section 4, Waste Management and Environmental Considerations. Here's an aspect of food operations that nobody thinks about but is absolutely critical. What happens to food waste on a destroyer that produces approximately 220 pounds of garbage every single day? On land, you put trash out for collection. At sea, on a stealth destroyer operating in potentially hostile waters, disposal becomes a complex environmental and operational challenge. The USS Michael Monsoor generates 3 categories of waste from food operations: biodegradable food waste, recyclable packaging, and non-recyclable trash. Each category is handled differently according to strict Navy environmental protocols and international maritime law. Biodegradable food waste, vegetable peels, meat scraps, leftover food, is collected in large containers and then pulped in a machine that grinds it into a slurry. This slurry is then discharged overboard, but only when the ship is in international waters at least 12 nautical miles from any coastline, and only after being ground to particles smaller than 1 inch. Recyclable materials like cardboard, aluminum cans, and plastic bottles are separated, compressed in a trash compactor that reduces volume by approximately 80%, and stored in designated compartments until the next port visit. The compacting process is crucial because storage space is limited. Without compaction, the recycling alone would fill a space the size of a small room within just 2 weeks. Non-recyclable waste is also compacted and stored, sometimes for months, because international regulations prohibit discharge of plastics, metal, and certain other materials anywhere in the ocean.